Hello, everybody. The students are coming into the room right now. We're also online for welcome those who are joining us online. I'm just going to give the students a couple of minutes. Welcome to Shoals Marine Lab, everyone who's online, waiting for the students to come in. All right, I'm gonna get going in the interest of time. So welcome everyone. Welcome to tonight's Rock Talk, the Marine Science Seminar series we have here at Shoals Marine Lab. I'm Jennifer Seavey. I'm the Executive Director here at Shoals. And tonight, our format for Rock Talks is a 45-minute talk and then 15 minutes Q&A. So please think of questions. Online, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to type them in, and I'd be happy to share them. And if you're here in the room, obviously just raise your hand and we will call on you. I think tonight's talk is going to be very unique and really interesting in this series. We recorded all these talks, by the way. They're all on our website, so you can check out the whole summer and previous summers there. So I'm really excited to have Dr. Anna Davidson with us from Cornell. She is a senior research associate and lecturer in natural resources and the environment at Cornell. She works and teaches at the interface of art and science, something that we hold dear here at Shoals. She has a master's in fine art, visual art, and a PhD in plant science from the University of California at Davis. She is interested in innovating interdisciplinary field-based teaching and learning experiences in art and ecology. And she's been talking about how she mixes those things with me. It sounds really fun. I think some of you would really enjoy going on a field class with her. She does expedition-based field artwork investigations to look at anthropogenic-induced climate change impacts and natural resource use and ecological memory. One cool project that I saw on her website is this project called Ocean Memory. And it's being done with a team of interdisciplinary experts and is exploring whether or not the ocean remembers. And what does that question even mean to science and art and literature, and what are all the opportunities in exploring that? So I think that sounds really interesting, and I'm looking forward to her talk. So welcome, Anna.
Okay, let me see if I can figure everything out. Okay, I'm gonna try to get rid of my face here so I don't have to. Okay, but I don't want to see it. Okay, I hope everything in this works because there's a lot of video and my computer is old, so I hope everything goes okay. Okay. So hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here to share some of my work with you. It's been a real delight getting to know some of you here at Shoals and see what's going on. It's a beautiful place. Thank you so much, Dr. Seavey, for the invitation, and to everyone who helped organize my trip here. So thank you so much. As Dr. Seavey pointed out, I'm at Cornell and I'm an artist and scientist, and my experiences in art and science have coalesced into this expeditionary field-based artwork where I look at topics in climate change, natural resource use, ecological memory, and exploring sense of place is really important to my art practice. So Arctic landscapes, deep sea hydrothermal vents, and now upstate New York are places on the planet that interest me the most at the moment. So for the first part of this talk, I'm going to provide a little bit of historical context, a little bit about art and environment and history. And then I'd like to share a little bit of my work. And I was also asked to share a bit about the path that I've taken that shaped my career. Well, it's more like hardcore bushwhacking or floating aimlessly in a giant sea. And some things that I think about that I believe are interesting and important that might resonate with this audience a bit. So I'll start by saying one of these topics that I think is really important is approaching our understanding of the natural world with an open and interdisciplinary lens by using tools and methods in both the humanities and the sciences. But of course, using art to understand or describe the natural world is nothing new, right? Depicting the physical environment and humankind's place within it has been central to art making since the earliest cave paintings over 30 millennia ago. Paintings were a way of celebrating and taming powers that were beyond their control in reality. They were also an attempt to make sense of the natural forces that exceeded their comprehension, yet on which they owed their existence. They represent a reliance on nature by using the very pigments that come from the earth, like ochre and charcoal, and on surfaces that were formed by natural processes. Cave paintings were visual representations of humanity's relationship with the environment and a literal enactment of that relationship. These prehistoric cave paintings that you see here are scattered over a large mountain range in the Sahara Desert dating back to 12,000 BC and are one of the most significant prehistoric cave paintings since they give us a glimpse into the climatic conditions of the Sahara. In the paintings, there are many depictions of lakes and forests, proving that the climate of the Sahara was much wetter at the time and slowly changed. In many centuries that followed, artists continued to represent the world around them. A greater awareness of natural sciences, such as botany and geology, enhanced the scenic elements of an artwork. You can see how Leonardo uses his knowledge of both of these sciences to embellish the foreground of the Virgin of the Rocks with botanical studies and enhance the mystical mood of its background with these imaginative rock formations. The invention of oil paint was another factor that made such a heightened level of naturalism possible, intensifying color, light, depth, and form. In the Romantic period in Europe, which coincided with the industrialization, depictions of the natural world in both poetry and paint were emblematic of some exalted higher order beyond the physical realm, the sublime. Scenes from nature demonstrated its capacity to inspire awe, reverence, emotion, terror as a result of its great beauty, vast expanse, or powerful force. Man saw his own potential in the infinity of nature. Meanwhile, in the US, many 19th century artists were painting the American landscape as a visual expression of their religious conviction and as a demonstration of the principles of manifest destiny, the widely held belief that the American settlers, guided by the divine hand, were destined to conquer the entire continent, depicted with a natural environment where humans and nature could coexist. Photography, too, played its part to illustrate the epic scale of the magnificent untapped wilderness. The concept of the national parks, in fact, were developed out of the great surveys of the American West from 1867 to 1879. Teams were sponsored by the Interior Department, soon to be the US Geological Survey. And while the survey initially aimed to earmark locations with valuable natural resources that could support the future industry, the photographs they produced captivated both politicians and citizens who were awestruck by the beauty of the Western landscape. These photographs convinced President Abraham Lincoln in 1864 to sign the Yosemite Grant, placing Yosemite and Mariposa Big Tree Grove in the care of the state of California. It marked the first time in US history that the government set land aside specifically to protect it and preserve it for public enjoyment. And of course, the Yosemite Grant was then used to justify the establishment of Yellowstone as the first national park in 1872, then Yosemite, and then of course many others followed. So as you know, in the 1960s, environmentalism became increasingly popular, and there was a great wave of social and cultural experimentation, convention breaking, communal living, and do-it-yourself attitude. I want to share a fun anecdote about Stuart Brand, a writer, artist, and founder of the counterculture magazine, The Whole Earth Catalog. He was part of the San Francisco Haight-Ashbury scene at the time. And so story goes, he took LSD on top of a San Francisco rooftop in 1966, and floating up over the city in his acid-induced imagination and then beyond the atmosphere, he felt this light bulb the size of a globe switch on. And quote, seeing Earth from space would transform the way we view our planet and ourselves. All was one and everything was connected. Brand would soon put together a plywood sandwich board asking, why haven't we seen the photograph of the whole Earth yet? As sort of a performance art piece, he would wear it along with a white jumpsuit and feathered top hat to college campuses like Berkeley and Stanford. And as part of his campaign for NASA to release these images of the whole Earth, he made buttons for distribution that he shipped off to NASA officials, Congress members, Soviet scientists, and anyone else he thought he would benefit from probing. He felt that if humans could see a picture of the whole Earth, it would prompt people to view and treat the planet in a new way, to cherish it. So in 1967, the first picture of the whole Earth was released by the ATS satellite that he put on the 1968 Whole Earth catalog cover. But it was this iconic image, Earthrise, taken by astronauts on Apollo 8 in 1968 that brought Brand's campaign to fruition. The Earth rising above the lunar horizon, only partially visible, floating steadily as if moored, quote, a dead planet in front of a living one. The living one in all its fragile smallness, Brand said. Earth is neither small nor fragile, of course, but that's a helpful way to think about it. This dichotomy is exactly what makes Earthrise such an enduring, iconic visual. On one hand, it looks vulnerable, small, fragile, alone, in a deep, untarnished black expanse. No protections from above. The only ones around to steward this land are those living directly on it. On the other hand, Earthrise gives us another vantage point, an external one. We are looking toward, not up from the Earth. It's an empowering perception that affirms that we are neither small nor fragile. New human-made technology is available, and the world is restorable, and we're the ones who might just be able to fix it. The whole Earth image, as well as the earlier Earthrise photograph above, prompted the people of the world to view the planet Earth in a new way. The modern environmental movement was galvanized in part by this new perception of the planet and the need to protect it and the life that it supports. It was put on Brand's Whole Earth catalog in 1969, stamps, other magazines, covers. And this photograph, along with writings by Rachel Carson and the Santa Barbara oil spill of 1969, and of course, the impacts of 150 years of industrial development inspired politicians and Americans to establish the first Earth Day. And that eventually led to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the first of their kind laws like the National Environmental Education Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, the Clean Air Act, et cetera, et cetera. This photograph also inspired a whole new genre of artists who now viewed the entire planet as a giant canvas. Land artists sought to create artworks that induced awe in the viewer, thus producing a new kind of pilgrimage and a new kind of visceral viewing experience to be had in nature. They looked at the Earth as a new giant canvas. My point here is that image making and art in general is inextricably linked with humans and our need to connect and record our experiences with the natural world. And it can even lead to changes in societal perception and policy. I argue it is as important as science, and the two hand in hand are needed to make progress. Unfortunately, the fight for a clean environment continues with increasing urgency as capitalism continues to take precedence. Today, we have a huge range of work in relation to the environment, from photography to active restoration and social engagement, or fascist aesthetics, as some art critics call it. This is a quote by Edward Burtynsky, the photographer of these two photographs. This is the sublime of our time. And here's another photograph of a mine in Clifton, Arizona, in the US. And these photographs allow us to see what's happening on the planet, which is great. But it's also argued that these photographs beautify destruction and can perpetuate a numbness to environmental destruction. On the opposite side of the aesthetic spectrum, we can consider the work of Richard Misrach, who in 1998 photographed a highly industrialized section of the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans called Cancer Alley. And these photographs do not beautify destruction, they're more honest. And just to show you a couple quick examples of social engagement, take the work by Agnes Dennis, which consisted of 2 acres of wheat planted and harvested by the artist on Battery Park landfill in Manhattan during the summer of 1982. It was planted 2 blocks from Wall Street in the World Trade Center, facing the Statue of Liberty. Planting and harvesting a field of wheat on land worth $4.5 billion created a powerful paradox. Wheat field was a symbol, a universal concept. It represented food, energy, commerce, world trade, and economics. It referred to mismanagement, waste, world hunger, and ecological concerns. It called attention to our misplaced priority. Revival Field by Mel Chin began as a conceptual artwork with the intent to sculpt a site's ecology. And the initial experiment located at Pig's Eye Landfill, a state Superfund site in St. Paul, Minnesota, it was replicated. They replicated a field test using special hyperaccumulator plants to extract heavy metals from contaminated soil. And scientific analysis of biomass samples from this field confirmed the potential of green remediation as an on-site, low-tech alternative to current costly and unsatisfactory remediation methods. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. I attended graduate school at UC Davis, located in the Central Valley of Northern California. First for plant science, where I got a PhD in plant ecological physiology with a focus on trees. And then immediately after, I returned to study visual arts with a focus on bioart, sculpture, and video. And I've always been interested in making art about the place I'm in at the time, the organisms that I'm interested in, and whatever is happening around me environmentally. So I'm going to go out on a limb and share some of my very early work with you. So in the last 10 years or more, there have been intensifying forest fires in California. And these are one of the first topics that I explored at school. These forest fires that were happening. And I promise we're gonna get to the ocean soon. So I grew up in Illinois with a potbelly stove as our main heating source. So our family would always congregate around it to talk about, what happened in school that day, or art or politics or whatever. So I decided to put a potbelly stove in my studio that you could sit next to and get warm. But inside there was a video of California burning. And these were fires that were currently happening as I was making art. So people could sit around it and have conversation about it. The Central Valley of California is also known as the breadbasket of our country, specifically for fruit and nut trees, and are mostly bee pollinated. And so while studying for at UC Davis, a prolific school for ecology and agriculture, we were really worried about the decline in the bee populations. And so this was a piece that I created inspired by that. This is a table I built out of cherry wood And then its shadow is hundreds of dead bees. I began keeping bees and sort of collaborating with them, making sculptures. As a fan of the bioart movement, I was fascinated with using life itself as a material. So I started growing fungus and documenting its growth, watching it cell by cell, going from something invisible to something visible, which I thought was a really cool concept at the time. I worked with potato dextrose agar and fungus for a really long time, and I would create these giant petri dishes or canvases, if you will, and painted with my colorful collection of fungus. And these are some images of that. The thing I liked working about that with that material is it looked celestial sometimes and like a microcosm other times, and I liked how I couldn't differentiate between that. I experimented with this material for a long time, weaving with it and quilting with it. I'm just gonna go. So I want to tell you about a really important moment that I had when I myself experienced the sublime. And it changed the trajectory of my art practice. So I was hiking in Patagonia in Torres del Paine by myself. And it was the first time I slept on a glacier in a tent. And that was a very powerful experience for me. But it was actually when I was going across that little bridge alone with no one around that I had my moment. And so I'm walking across this bridge with this huge 50-pound backpack on and, you know, hanging onto the ropes. And all of a sudden I hear this super, super loud, deep noise. It was like thunder. And then I felt the bridge start shaking. And then I see this avalanche happen right before my very eyes, just for me. No one was there. And I was safe on the bridge, but it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life and the most terrifying thing that I'd ever seen in my life. And it was like Mother Nature just putting me back in my place, putting me back on the food chain. And it was really humbling and just really sublime. And that's when I really realized what that word meant. And so it was one of my most impressionable and inspiring traveling moments I ever had. And so I began trying to find ways to get back to that feeling I had. So I was trying to find ways of how to put myself in these vulnerable situations where I'm totally exposed to the earth in really raw ways. And I wanted more of ice. I wanted to feel primal, to find that sublime again. So I began this quest to locations on the planet where I thought maybe I would get this high again. So this is in the Atacama Desert in Chile. This is Yellowstone. I started taking pictures and finding myself at these geyser systems because they felt like a primordial soup. And this is when I started exploring my sense of self as animal, as a product of an environment, and exploring where my ancestors came from, as in archaea and bacteria, and how far away and ill-adapted I am for this environment, and how my morphology has no reason for being there. And this is also when I started exploring with the use of video and performance. So I finally got enough money to buy a kind of nice camera, and for the first time in my life, and went backpacking in Alaska to try to find it again. And this is a piece I did at the, I was at the Harding Ice Field in Alaska and took a lot of video here, and then I brought it back, and this is what the installation looks like in the studio. The video that I shot at the Harding Ice Field was shown through these giant slabs of ice as the final installation. I then got pretty into ice. I started working in a freezer like every day in California to make sculpture, which is, I know, not very sustainable. And when I was working in the freezer one day, there was an oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara again in 2015. I don't know if you remember. And so that inspired me to add oil to this piece. And it got me thinking a lot about Arctic oil exploration and its consequences. And I'll remind you, I already mentioned that there was an oil spill in 1969 that inspired Earth Day. So second Santa Barbara oil spill. And then it looked rather beautiful as it melted and made a really big mess. This is an example of some work that I was making at the time when I was collaborating with some poets. I would carve their poetry in clay into these giant slabs, and then we would hang them around the arboretum. At this point, I wanted to explore the Arctic more and make art about this landscape that's slowly disappearing. So I applied to the Arctic Circle residency and was ecstatic when I was accepted. And that's a group of artists, 20 other artists living and working aboard this glacial icebreaker sailboat. We were on it for a month. It has 11 sails. Its name is the Antigua. And it was this really amazing experience for me. We sailed around the fjords of Svalbard, Norway, and then up to the pack ice to the actual North Pole. And we were able to do that because there wasn't very much ice that year, unfortunately. And so this is some of the work I made on that trip. Upon my return to my studio with all of these materials, I started making work using the video footage and a lot of the sound that I collected. So I forgot to hook up sound to this. Maybe you can kind of hear it. This is my colleague, Heather Spence, who's a marine biologist and musician on the viola da gamba. And this is, we collaborated at this residency that I'll tell you more about. Sorry about the sound. So that piece is definitely a downer. The nature guide woman we were with said that polar bear probably wasn't going to survive that year because there is such little ice. Okay, so when I'm in the field, I collect like a mad woman. I do everything I can to record everything from underwater sounds of icebergs to photos to collecting plant specimens. Here I am making cyanotypes of melting glacial ice and some of the flora there. It's kind of interesting because I was working next to writers and poets, and all the visual artists are scrambling to like get as much material as they can to bring back to their studio when they're done. All the writers are reading or writing the whole time. And then the poets are just like relaxing the whole entire time, like taking it in. And I always wonder, like, do they do their work at night or while I'm sleeping? And I was always very impressed with their ability to chill and take it in. These are just some images of those cyanotypes. I was just trying to capture some images. I use cyanotypes because it has this element of time that a regular photograph can't really capture. On the top left is the melting ice. On the bottom right is the flora, and on the bottom left is plant specimens, and on the bottom right is beach plastic. And I was amazed at how much plastic there was on these Arctic beaches. I was shocked. I expected it in certain places of the world, but I did not expect it there. So obviously I can't be in this incredible landscape all the time. So I bring everything I collect back with me to my studio and sort of unpack and start making stuff. This is an example of a sculpture that I made out of porcelain and recycled bicycle tubes that were inspired by some of the icebergs that I saw in the Arctic Ocean. So I was working on that Arctic video piece, 81 degrees, that I showed you at a residency called the Scientific Delirium Madness, which I know it's a very cheesy name. And that's at the Djerassi residency for the arts in the Santa Cruz Mountains, but there's one section where they bring scientists and artists together in the same residency, and there's supposed to be this delirious madness going on. Anyway, the director, Margot Knight, saw my work and suggested I get involved with this new group called the Ocean Memory Project, which Jennifer mentioned, which was a really enriching experience. So the Ocean Memory Project was born out of the NAFC Challenge, National Academy's Keck Futures Initiative is what that stands for. And they were looking for thinkers who could interpret the ocean in a new, totally new, radical way. And so one of the awards was given to this group who asked the question, does the ocean have a memory? And so it started in 2016, and it's a dynamic group of people from all different kinds of disciplines, from anthropology to oceanography, psychology, art, theater, writing, and we're all thinking about this same question, does the ocean have a memory, from these radical different points of view. And we'd like to make this paradigmatic shift on how we think about the ocean. So we have a lot of meetings together in ocean-related places and events and exhibitions, seminars. The first meeting was at the University of Washington's Friday Harbor Laboratories. These are in the middle there, in those circles, are some of the conferences that are being supported by the Ocean Memory Group. But when I was at the first meeting at Friday Harbor, I met oceanographer Jody Deming from the University of Washington, who was talking about all this wild bacteria and Arctic ice and this ecological memory that this bacteria holds. And that whole concept really blew my mind. And I met oceanographers John Barros and Susan Lang, who were talking about underwater volcanoes and hydrothermal vents and how life probably first started at these sites. And they showed me all these pictures of this amazing deep ocean geological architectural structures. And I was like, talk about sublime. Like, I want to go there and I want to study oceanography now. And the great thing about being an artist is it's like having a free pass or like a press pass. You get to you get this permission to go down whatever rabbit hole you want to, which was a very different feeling I had when I was a scientist, when I was in grad school or postdocing. And that freedom can be pretty rare, especially in academia. So anyway, I told Susan, if you ever go on a cruise to the Lost City and you need an artist on board, just give me a call. And so a few months later, I got the call, there's a berth open and we'd love to have an artist on board. And so in September 2018, we left Woods Hole on the Atlantis, that is pictured here. And we headed to the Lost City hydrothermal vents that are located on the MidAtlantic Ridge, halfway between the USA and Africa. We had to dodge 4 hurricanes to get there. It was in September, and so that was a little rough on the old stomach. But once we got there, it was really, really amazing. I'm a little hesitant to talk to this group about oceanography stuff. So just keep that in mind. I'm a newcomer. So the discovery of these hydrothermal vents occurred in the 1970s, and it provided the first evidence that the sun was not the only source of energy. Up until then, I was thinking photosynthesis. Well, I've heard of chemosynthesis, but I mostly concentrated on photosynthesis. But so, these living organisms can harness and expand our knowledge on chemosynthesis that points to an ocean of all of these unfathomable forms of biology that are waiting to be discovered. The lost city specifically was discovered in 2000, and it has an even crazier source of energy that supports life called serpentinization. And that's simply when mantle rocks like olivine come up from the mantle, mixed with seawater, it gives off this exothermic reaction, and hydrogen and methane and probably other gases that supports this these very simple forms of life. And many oceanographers think that life first started there. So I was very interested in this whole idea about going to a place where life could have possibly first started. While on the ship, though, I also learned that the unique scientific and cultural value of the lost city is under consideration for special protection by the UNESCO World Heritage Center and the International Union for Conservation of Nature. However, I was astonished to learn that simultaneously, the lost city is also included in a parcel of seafloor that the International Seabed Authority has approved for deep sea mining exploration by a Polish mining company. So that kind of blew my mind to learn about these 50 people wearing suits behind closed doors, doling out the sea floor. I didn't vote on that. So I was just, I didn't know about that. And I was astonished. And then, deep sea mining, what's deep sea mining? And I didn't know about that either. And so this trip for me was like seeing a picture of Earthrise, seeing the picture of the whole Earth. But I was seeing the bottom of the ocean. And so my mind was blown. And since then, I've been thinking about these fragile ecosystems, hydrothermal vents, the origins of life, threats of deep sea mining, and how it's all connected to our energy use on land. And I'm sure that this crowd knows a lot more about deep sea mining than me, or the idea of deep sea mining. But I'll just tell you again in case there's one person who doesn't know about it. And I'll tell you as best as I can. So the lost city where I went is a white smoker. So it probably isn't in this dire situation, but white smokers are vents that emit lighter colored minerals like barium and calcium and silicon. And they also tend to have lower temperatures. Black smoker vents emit dark particles with high levels of sulfur-bearing minerals or sulfides. And that dark color is caused, to my understanding, because dissolved minerals precipitate as these tiny little metal-rich particles forming smoke. And this is due to large differences in temperature between the discharging fluids of 350 degrees Celsius or something like that, and the surrounding seawater, which is like 2 degrees Celsius. And then plus the rapid changes in acidity and oxygen content. So they look like this, these polymetallic nodules that fall to the sea floor and surround these hydrothermal vent areas. And they're rich with manganese or cobalt, copper, nickel, all these things that are used in our renewable energy resources, things in our computers and cell phones and batteries. And so the more we use this kind of technology, the more metals we'll need, right? But I've also heard the argument that this argument is exaggerated and that we need to be focusing more on the circular economy of materials instead of mining because we already have enough. So I'm welcome conversation about this because I'm still confused about it. And nobody knows what these harmful disturbances will do to the life that exists at these hydrothermal vents. There hasn't been a lot of studies. These are stills that I took from a video produced by from MIT on a generalized hypothetical deep sea mining approach. And there's these sediment plumes that could cause a lot of damage to the organisms that live in these areas. So I found all of this really disturbing and great material to make art from. So, okay, so I'm gonna bring you back up to the boat, back to making art on the boat because I went down this deep sea mining rabbit hole. This is Jason, our ROV we used to explore and sample the lost city. My job aboard the ship was to help with the cameras and footage. And with that footage, I make video work about it. These are some stills from a video piece that I made. This was my room and my beloved porthole from which I painted the seascape and the daily weather patterns and documented where we were on the sea every day. And this is what that looked like in the gallery. Then back in the studio, I created some sculptures. I used a lot of scanning and transmission electron microscopy images of these unique organisms and biofilms that occur at the lost city. In this piece, there are water samples that we collected from the vents and chimney samples, more carbonate chimney. And I started using wire and mirror to sort of reflect these threats of deep sea mining that I was thinking about. Yeah, this is some of that work. These are some images that I also put in this recent show that I created from photographs of the geological formations and then the microorganisms that are housed in them or around them. So this is some of the work that I'll be using as jumping off point for my current body of work that, well, the body of work that I'm starting really soon for a show at the McKissick Museum at the University of South Carolina, which is where my collaborator Susan Ling was working for the past several years. And it'll be a combination of my artwork and some scientific objects from her expeditions to these hydrothermal vents. So I'd really like to explore deep sea mining in greater detail for this upcoming project. Do I have time for one more project? Or, okay, I'll just tell you this really fast. This is a project that I've started a long time ago and I'm kind of reopening. Can't hear the sound very well. So as the Earth's climate changes, sea ice and permafrost melt, preserved remnants of are being created. One such example are exquisitely preserved pieces of wood from trees that belong to an ancient oil forest that existed near the North Pole. And but of course it was a different climate than what exists today. So these are some components to installation. So this story kind of takes place at Ellesmere Island, around 80 degrees north. It's barren tundra. It looks like this today. But in the Pliocene and Eocene, it looked a lot different. CO2 levels were different, rain patterns were monsoonal, and temperatures were much warmer, supporting this more a lush boreal forest system. And I had read this article about this this wood that has been exquisitely preserved. It hasn't been fossilized. Usually wood looks like it does on the left, but these remnants of these trees were just preserved in this mud for 45 million years. And so I thought that was just really interesting, and a great example of ecological memory and how we can think about tree species moving farther north, or plant species in general moving farther north as climate warms. And then I started thinking about like the 24-hour daylight question. What are trees doing in 24-hour daylight and night when they need to photosynthesize during the day, but they fix their carbon into carbohydrates at night? So how are they dealing with, or how did they deal with 24-hour daylight? And so I called the scientists and asked them if they could send me some of this wood, and I started doing some anatomy. And like you can see here, there's only like 2 or 3 cells in 1 year that the tree was able to put on. So clearly they were under stress. This is a metasequoia tree 45 million years ago. You can see their cells are really smushed, and this is modern day. And then I started doing micro CT scanning on them. Sorry, I'll just turn this sound off. And then I started collaborating with this climate scientist and oceanographer, Patrick Rafter, and we were talking about this graph here about this sawtooth pattern of carbon dioxide fluxes. These are reconstructed from gases trapped within Antarctic ice cores for the past 800,000 years in blue, and then the modern human-induced rise in CO2 shown in red. And so we took that data, and I collaborated with a physicist and composer, Marco Buongiorno Nardelli, and he created this composition that you may or may not be able to hear from the computer that uses this data. And so that's project, but it got kind of sidelined because we some other scientists and I also went to the Wiseman, Alaska, to the Brooks Range to actually do an experiment, a 24-hour daylight experiment on trees there. So I have to kind of open the art project back up. So that's a project that I'm working on. And then finally, I teach classes, one field research in the ecological arts, and another class this fall called Earth Projects. It's a traveling class. It's a 7-week traveling class at Cornell. And we're going to go to a couple different sites in New York State, to Lake Oneida and Arnott Forest. And it's all about sense of place and using methods in both the sciences and the arts to sort of understand an environment and get a sense of place. And so students will be making artwork there at these different sites. And then we'll be having a final exhibition at this place called the Soil Factory, which is a warehouse space in Ithaca, New York, where it's kind of a place for artists and scientists to gather for experiments and exhibitions and social stuff. And so as part of that, I'm going to be doing a research project that examines, it's funded by the National Academy of, or National Endowment of the Arts, but it's doing a science experiment on using integrating art in environmental science classes as a method of learning. So I'll be using my students as subjects, and that will be happening over the next 3 years in this traveling art and ecology course. So with that, are there any questions? Or comments? Or ideas that you want to share? Yeah.
What do you find interesting about
Oh, that's a good question. I've been so worried about my talk that I haven't been able to think about it. No, it's beautiful. First of all, it's breathtaking. So the scenery is just amazing. The birds, I think, have been pretty frontal, I guess. They've been like the major thing I've been seeing and talking to you. I've been learning a lot about the seabirds and how many different species are here, and that this is a breeding ground and how scary they are to walk by. Yeah, I mean, I would love to spend more time here to really get to know the island more.
Oh, in our classes, artist complex, Scott, there was students for a couple of hours. They do 2 weeks of science and 2 hours of art. Do you ever rebalance that in some way, make it more equal with that somehow help both art and science?
I mean, I think it would give the students more of an appreciation for, using tools and methods in the arts to understand a location, to understand a place. So, I mean, I try to do 50-50 kind of in my classes. It's hard though, depending on the topic or the location, or what guest speakers you invite, or how deep you get into projects. Like sometimes if the art's flowing, you just don't want to stop, and you don't want to go on to the next project, and so you don't want to interrupt. And other times I feel like I have a lot of environment and sustainability students in my classes, and actually not that many artists. And so I think they expect a lot of science, but they're also taking this class to, do something different, I think.
Question online. Maybe you should keep this here. For people interested in getting involved in science and art, do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, pick up some books. I have lots of a big book list. If you're, I don't know where they are in life, but if they're in school, they can take more classes in art and science. There's a ton of residencies out there that are at the intersection of art and science. If like artists are looking to get involved in science, like there's the NSF, what is it called? Greater impacts sections of all the grants, and artists can come in handy for that. And so that's a great place for artists to tap in. But I think residencies, any field experiences you can possibly have are really important. It depends if you're starting from art or from science or from somewhere totally
What
different.
about a young scientist who's interested in incorporating art into their career?
I would just say do it. It's really hard. I got a lot of pushback when I was getting my PhD in science. I would sneak off to go take sculpture classes in the art department when I was supposed to be taking classes in R. And my PI didn't really appreciate that. But it was me, and he knew I was gonna just do it anyway. And then and so you kind of look bad when you're taking art classes as a PhD student when you're supposed to be focused. And then when I was in art school, I was supposed to be focusing on sculpture, and I was sneaking off taking mycology classes so I could learn more about growing mushrooms in my studio and creating a setup so I could make the sculpture that I wanted to make. So I had to take this whole other class so I could just learn how to grow mushrooms for this. And so, art faculty didn't appreciate that. either. And so it makes you look like you're not, you know, a real scientist or a real artist when you're doing these, you know, crossing the disciplines. And my advice would be, screw it, do what you want, and just listen to yourself and do whatever you want, if you can. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could comment on the role of observation and inquiry with you as a scientist and you as a scientist.
Yeah, I find them to be really similar. You know, my lab notebook sometimes looks like my sketchbook. I have a lot of sketches in my lab notebook, and in my sketchbook, I have recipes for the best potato dextrose agar to grow fungus. And so I'm always like observing all the time. I mean, I'm a trained scientist, so I can't untrain myself when I'm making art. And so I think that's just there and will always be there. Inquiry, I think, is pretty different in science and art. I think I was just doing science wrong, maybe. But in my experience, I was pipetting a lot. I was taking the same samples over and over every summer. And like I said, when I hear about these stories of hydrothermal vents, it's like, I want to go there. I don't want to pipette anymore. And so, you know, I think, at least for art, I find that I have a lot more freedom to ask questions and to answer them in whatever way I want. It doesn't have to be in a graph on a poster at a conference. It can be through a performance. It can be, you know, yeah, through a sculpture. And I think that that's ultimately better for me and my personality. It's a little less restrictive. So I think for art, it lets me ask more questions and allows me to get more information from lots of different people and lots of different places. And I talk to a ton of different people. And that's what's exciting about being involved in academia, like at Cornell or UC Davis. I mean, there's so many people working on so many different things. And like talking to you today, I could talk to you for days and days and bottles of wine. But it's just so great to be able to collaborate with all these different kinds of people.
Can you just reflect on your thoughts about the art science and changing people's minds? Because especially people out here think a lot about art. We don't seem to be doing a very good job doing that lately.
I mean, that's a huge question that I mean, I tried to kind of touch on that a little bit in my intro, like sort of the importance of art making and image and how that can change, you know, society. Like we thought that a picture of the whole earth was gonna save the planet. And so, I mean, I think imagery is super powerful. Art is super powerful. And science too. I mean, you know, obviously. And like I said, I think if science and art can be married somehow, or there's collaboration between artists and scientists, I feel like maybe some of these world problems can be solved or at least chipped away at a little bit more efficiently, I guess, if there's lots of perspectives coming at some of these issues. I mean, I oscillate a lot back and forth between art is the most ridiculous thing on the planet, and what am I doing here? Like, standing by this geyser, filming myself, like this is so stupid. To yeah, art is the only thing in the world that's going to save the planet at this point. So I'm always going between that and kind of the same thing with science, like, pipetting and pipetting and pipetting and pipetting and pipetting. You're like, what am I doing with my life? No one's going to read my paper, like, except for maybe my boss and like the reviewers, and that's probably it. But then, you have these great science days. So, but I think really there's a lot of power in having these collaborations. And I know my experiences in the Ocean Memory Project, like, we have some just radical conversations that I would never have in a lab and that I would never have in art studios, like from spirituality to genetics to travel. I mean, it brings you to tears sometimes because you're so into what you're talking to, because you're like, here I am talking to this oceanographer in the National Academy of Sciences. Like, why am I talking to this guy? And he's telling me these amazing stories. And then I'm learning from this. And so these collaborations can be just so rich. And then it leaks, and then people are starting to do all kinds of different things because of this Ocean Memory Project about the environment. And yeah, and I also think that organizing, like, is really important now too. So like organize, like politically, I think we have to add that into our science and into our art as much as possible to be able to get anywhere, I think. Because I don't consider myself an organizer, but I need to start, I think.
I'm gonna let the surge students who are downstairs who are asking all these questions that are coming through me, I'll let them have the last question, which is that they are really, at least a few of them are very interested in combining science and art. You feel like having the degrees, the formal study has been important to help you do that. Kind of a career path question.
I want to lie and say hell no, but yes, I think it's really important. At least it has been for me. When I was studying science, I met with Eduardo Katz, who's a really famous bioartist, and I was talking about how I wanted to like do stuff in art and science and fuse the two, and he was like, "Well, you need to go to art school." And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like, okay. And it was really helpful to go to art school and to be trained in critique and to look at other people's work and to just, it's like learning another language. And I think that that's really important to be able to crosstalk between disciplines. And like, if I was an art student, I probably wouldn't know ecophysiological plant terms if I didn't get a PhD in plant science. So it has been really helpful for me. And being in academia, like, period, is really helpful because there's all these, there's money, there's opportunities, there's conferences, there's grants. And I think that's really helpful as opposed to being an artist who's not associated with academia. I think it might be a little bit harder, but I've also never been in that situation, so I don't know.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, just want to wrap it up here. Oh, if we can go back to the Zoom call.
Yeah, it just, my computer takes a while. Oh, it stopped here.
Yeah, great. There we go. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. I feel like we could talk about that. Maybe we will later. All right. So everyone, thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you online and in the room. Our next Rock Talk is Catherine Matassa. Again, remember, these are online. So even if you leave Shoals, you can still come join us on Tuesday nights And she's assistant professor of marine science at University of Connecticut. And her work focuses on the Rocky intertidal. So that will be next week at the same time, online and in person. And you can find out about joining us online on our Facebook page, Shoals Facebook page, and on our website, there's a live stream page and you can find information there too. So if you want to join those, we'd love to see you. All right, thank you. Thanks online. See ya.
Bye, Jen. Thanks.